Montana Territory, June 22, 1879, just after sunup. The sky still bruised from the night Evelyn Stokes opened the door to her farmhouse and stepped into ruin. The barn was gone, burned straight down to the stone foundation. The roof of the chicken coop had caved in, smoke trailing up in sluggish gray threads. The garden fence had been torn out and hoofprints too many to count cut deep into the soil like open wounds. She ran barefoot through the yard, heart pounding. Nathan, Nora, no answer. Only the wind in the grass, the creak of the barn's blackened skeleton, and the far-off cry of a hawk. She reached what was left of the coop and found the feathers first, then the tracks leading east, small ones, her children's. Her throat tightened, they were gone. Evelyn dropped to her knees in the dirt, one hand clutching the scorched ground like it might hold her together. It had only taken one night for everything to fall apart. The farm had been theirs, hers, and the twins since her husband died nearly 3 years ago. It was not much, but it was home, and now it was ash. A distant sound broke the silence. Hooves. A single horse. She stood, swiping tears from her cheeks. A rider was coming down the ridge road, tall in the saddle, dust trailing behind him. He slowed when he saw her. "Ma'am," the cowboy called out, voice steady, low. "You all right?" She said nothing, just stared at him. He was young, maybe 30, with a square jaw and sun-browned skin, his dark hair curling under a weathered hat. He swung down from the saddle and approached slow, hands open. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "Name's Silas Vaughn, came from west of Billings, saw smoke from the trail." Evelyn's voice cracked. "They took my children." Silas's eyes sharpened. "Who? I do not know. Outlaws, maybe." There were too many tracks to count. He glanced around at the wreckage, then back at her. "Do you know which way they went?" "East, toward the tree line." He nodded once. "Then we ride," she blinked. I will not let you go alone. "And I do not leave children behind." Evelyn stared at him, unsure what to make of this stranger who had appeared from the dust like something out of a story. But there was no time to question it. She nodded once. "Let me get my boots." They rode fast. The sun had fully risen by the time they reached the edge of the forest, the tracks clearer now in the loam. Evelyn's heart ached with every hoofprint. Nora had a slight limp from a sprain last winter. Nathan's step was always heavier. She knew their paths like she knew her own breath. Silas rode ahead, scanning the trees. He did not talk much, which suited Evelyn just fine. She was not in the mood for chatter. But every time he looked back to check on her, something in his eyes steadied her. By afternoon, they found the first sign, a strip of cloth snagged on a branch. Blue gingham, Nora's. Evelyn clutched it to her chest, her fingers trembling. Silas dismounted and crouched beside a low bush. "They stopped here," he said. "Fire pit's still warm." Evelyn looked around. "They cannot be far." Silas stood. "You stay with the horses." "I can scout ahead." "No," she said quickly. "They are my children." He studied her a second, then gave a small nod. "All right, but stay close." They moved silent through the trees, following the trail until the shadows grew long. Then they heard it, laughter. Men's voices, rough and careless, echoing through the pines. Silas dropped low, motioning for her to do the same. They crawled to a ridge and looked down into a clearing. 3 men sat around a fire. Nathan and Nora were tied up against a fallen log, their little faces pale and tight with fear. Evelyn's nails dug into the earth. "We have to get them out." "We will," Silas said. "But not head on. You wait here." "No," he turned to her, eyes dark. "You are brave, I see that. But if something happens to you, your kids have no one." Evelyn swallowed hard. "What are you going to do?" He did not answer. Just looked at her one last time, then slipped down the hill like shadow. What followed was fast and fierce. Silas moved in from the side while the men were distracted. One went down without a sound. Another turned, saw him, and reached for his gun, but Silas was faster. The third tried to run, but Evelyn had already picked up a fallen branch and met him head-on with a crack that echoed through the trees. Then it was quiet again. Silas knelt beside the twins, cutting the ropes. "You all right, little ones?" Nathan nodded, wide-eyed. Nora clung to Evelyn and sobbed into her shoulder. Evelyn held both of them close, heart pounding. "You came," Nathan whispered. "Of course I did," she said, voice shaking. "I will always come." Silas stood, watching them for a moment, then looked away like he did not want to intrude on their moment. They rode back slow, this time with Evelyn in the middle, both children tucked close beside her. Silas rode ahead, quiet as ever, but she caught him glancing back every now and then. That night they made camp near the river. Evelyn tucked the twins into bedrolls, brushing Nora's hair back from her eyes, kissing Nathan's forehead. When they were asleep, she walked over to where Silas sat by the fire. "Thank you," she said. He looked up. "You do not need to thank me." "I do," she said. "You did not have to help, but you did." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I saw the smoke. I could not just ride past." Evelyn sat beside him. The fire crackled between them. "You are not from around here," she said. "No," he replied. "Been drifting a while. Used to have a place down in Arizona Territory, left after my brother died. Been riding ever since." She looked at him, really looked. There was something in his eyes, steady but tired, like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. "I know what that feels like," she said quietly. "Losing someone." He met her gaze, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. Then he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small tin. "I have some coffee left, not much but enough for two." She smiled softly. "I would like that." They sat close, sharing the tin between them, the fire warming their hands. The children slept nearby, safe again. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that came after something had been broken and slowly started to mend. Silas looked at her. "You are strong." "I have had to be," he nodded. "Still, it is something." Evelyn looked into the fire, then back at him. "You can stay if you want, we have room." He blinked, surprised. "I am not asking for anything," she said quickly. "Just, it would be nice for the children." "For me?" Silas studied her, then gave the smallest smile, the first one she had seen from him. "I think I would like that, Evelyn." And for the first time in a long while, she felt something she had not dared feel in years: hope. The morning after the fire, Evelyn stood beside the riverbank, her skirts damp with dew, a willow branch in her hand. She watched the current catch on stones, slow and sure, and tried to let its rhythm quiet the thoughts that kept circling. Behind her, Nora and Nathan helped Silas gather dry pine for a cooking fire. Their voices drifted over the water, Nathan asking questions, Nora correcting him. "You've a patient way with them," she said when Silas joined her, a small mess tin in one hand. He passed her the coffee. "They're good kids, curious, quick. They've had to be," she said, taking a careful sip. "Not much room for softness when you've got a place to keep running on your own." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, just settled. Silas crouched near the bank and washed his hands clean of ash and trail dust. "Where will you go now?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "The farmhouse is still standing, but everything else is gone. No feed, no livestock, no seed left to plant." He looked up at her. "You plan to rebuild." "I want to," she said, "but wanting's never been the hard part." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. "There's a general store in Melstone, about 2 days' ride southeast. Owner's name is Booth. He's decent, lets folks trade labor if they're short on coin. I've worked for him before." She glanced at the paper. A rough map, hand-drawn. "You think I should go?" "I think it'd give you a start. Enough to buy nails, seed, grain. Maybe a few hens." Evelyn folded the paper and tucked it into her apron. "Could you come with us, just until we get there?" Silas's jaw worked for a moment like he was weighing something. "I will." That night they camped in the shelter of a rock bluff. Nathan scraped moss from a flat stone while Nora tried to catch fireflies in her palms. Evelyn stitched a torn hem by lantern light, her needle flashing like a sliver of moon. Silas sat a little ways off, whittling a branch down to a point. "You ever think of settling again?" she asked without looking up. He didn't answer right away. "I tried once after my brother passed, but it didn't hold." "Why not?" "I didn't belong to the place. Folks there didn't see me as someone who could build things. Only as someone who'd lost too much." She finished her thread and bit it clean. "Seems to me you're doing some building now." He set the stick down. "Maybe this feels different." She looked up at him. "How?" He met her eyes across the low fire. "You didn't look at me like I was broken. You just looked at me." The flames snapped, sending a burst of sparks into the dark, and neither of them looked away. They reached Melstone 2 nights later. Evelyn kept the children close while Silas spoke to the storekeeper, a broad man with a missing thumb and a generous laugh. They traded the last of Silas's spare gear for canvas, flour, and seed potatoes. Booth even tossed in a sack of oats when Nathan offered to sweep the front porch. Before they left, Evelyn found Silas loading the supplies onto the packhorse. "You didn't have to give up your tools," she said. "They'll do more good in your hands than rusting in mine." She stepped closer. "You said this felt different. I think it does too." He looked at her, quiet again in that way he had when something mattered. "If I stayed, would that be welcome?" "There's a room in the house," she said. "And the roof doesn't leak." "That's not what I meant." She didn't blink. "I know." He reached out, brushed a loose curl from her cheek. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "I don't need the road anymore," he said. "Not if there's a place I'm wanted." "You are," she said. "You are." When they rode west again, the wagon piled with seed and canvas, it wasn't just a return, it was a beginning. Evelyn rode with her shoulders straighter. Silas rode beside her, and when Nathan reached for his hand to help balance on a narrow crossing, Silas didn't hesitate. They built a new coop first, then dug fresh furrows by hand. Nora picked wildflowers to press in the new Bible that Silas had traded for in town. Each evening, Evelyn and Silas sat on the porch steps, their boots dusty, their hands close enough to touch. "I never thought I'd find peace again," he said one night as the sun turned the fields gold. "You didn't find it," she said. "You helped make it." And this time, when she leaned her head against his shoulder, he stayed still and steady, just the way she needed. The first frost came early that year, thin white crystal along the porch rail and brittle in the grass before sunrise. Evelyn woke before the rooster again, pulled her shawl close, and stepped out into the cold, her breath blooming in the dark. The barn frame stood tall now, its beams jointed and braced, though the roof still waited on shingles. She set a kettle on the stove, careful not to wake the children. Through the kitchen window, the sky softened toward gray. She found Silas already outside, sawing board lengths beneath the cottonwood. His coat was patched at the elbow now, another quiet sacrifice she'd noticed but hadn't spoken on yet. She stepped off the porch and crossed the yard, boots crunching over frost-hardened earth. "You always get up this early?" she asked, hands tucked into her sleeves. "Before my feet hit the ground most days," Silas said, pausing long enough to wipe his brow. "Spent too many years sleeping light, hard to unlearn." Evelyn leaned against the fence. "Must be strange, staying in one place again." He looked at her, then down at the sawdust gathering near his boots. "It's different than I remembered, easier in some ways, harder in others." "What's harder?" "Knowing it can be taken. That even when you build something good, it doesn't make it safe." She nodded, her gaze drifting toward the fields where young sprouts pushed hopeful through the furrows. "I think about that too, every day." Silas set the saw aside and came to stand beside her. "Does it scare you?" "I don't let it," she said. "Fear doesn't change what has to be done." He watched her a long moment, the lines at the corners of his mouth deepening. "I've known folks who lost less and never stood up again. I didn't stand up alone." He didn't answer, but the quiet between them felt warmer than the sun. Later that afternoon, while Nathan helped dig post holes and Nora sorted seed sacks in the kitchen, Evelyn found Silas kneeling by the firewood stack, tightening the bindings on an old trunk she hadn't seen before. Scratches marked its surface like a map of places long past. "You keeping that for the children?" she asked. "No, it's mine," he said, glancing up. "Been carrying it since I left Arizona Territory, never opened it, not once." She crouched beside him. "Why now?" He hesitated, thumb resting on the latch. "Because I might not need to carry it anymore." Inside lay a folded cavalry coat, threadbare but clean, and a pair of small sketches tied with twine. One drawing showed two young men standing side by side, hats in hand. The other was a woman, face unfinished, eyes delicate and unsure. "She was the last thing I tried to draw," he said, "before everything fell in." Evelyn ran her fingers along the edge of the paper, careful not to smudge the charcoal. "You were good. Real good. I used to think I had time to get better. You still do." He looked at her then, not as someone waiting for permission, but someone deciding whether to believe he deserved it. "I thought if I stopped writing, the past would catch up, but it hasn't." "It won't," she said. "Not if you keep walking forward." When he touched her hand, it was slow, uncertain. She didn't pull away. The world had gone quiet around them the way it did before weather turned or something bloomed. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. "I do," she said. And for the first time, I can picture it. That evening, Evelyn laid the finished quilts on the children's beds while Silas lit the lanterns. The house smelled of beeswax and pine, and the wind rattled gently at the windows. In the parlor, Nora hummed while drawing in the margin of a worn book, and Nathan used a stick to trace shapes on the hearthstone. Evelyn stepped into the doorway and watched them a moment before speaking. "Would you want a room of your own in the house?" she asked Silas. "Not just for the nights." "I mean, for good." He looked up from the lantern, thumb pressed to the glass chimney. "You sure?" "I wouldn't ask if I weren't." He rose slowly, every movement deliberate. When he reached her, he didn't say anything right off. Just brushed his fingers against hers and then took her hand with both of his. "I never thought I'd be needed again," he said. "You're not just needed," she whispered. "You're wanted." He kissed her then, simple and steady, like a promise made without ceremony. In the next room, the fire crackled low. Outside, wind rustled the dried leaves on the cottonwood. Inside, Evelyn leaned into Silas's warmth, the weight of his hand at her back. She felt, for the first time in 3 long years, not like someone rebuilding but someone building forward, with someone who stayed. They finished the roof by the 2nd week of October, just as the northern wind settled in sharp off the hills. Silas nailed the last cedar shingle into place as Evelyn stood below, holding the ladder steady, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. From where she stood, she could see the lines of his shoulders as he worked broad, sure, every movement practiced from years of labor. The children were down by the creek with a neighbor girl from 2 homesteads over, trading stories and smoothing river stones in their palms. Evelyn looked up. "You think that'll hold through winter?" Silas tapped the final nail flush and exhaled. "It'll hold longer than I will." She smiled faintly, but her gaze didn't leave the new roof. "I still wake up sometimes, thinking I'll walk outside and find it all gone again." He climbed down, tucking the hammer into his belt. "It's not going anywhere." She didn't speak right away. "Then I know." But knowing and believing aren't always the same. He dusted sawdust from his sleeves. "What would help?" "I don't think it's a matter of help," she said. "It's just that I've never had anything stay." He watched her for a beat, then held out his hand. "Come walk with me." They crossed the field, boots soft in the turned soil. The trees along the far edge had gone gold and brittle, their leaves falling in loose spirals. Beyond them, the land opened wide to the horizon, no fences, no tracks, just the open, waiting quiet of late autumn. Silas stopped near a stump half-eaten with moss and sat. Evelyn stood beside him, hands in her coat pockets. "I enlisted when I was 19, he said. "Told myself it was for the pay. My brother said it was to outrun something." "What were you running from?" He looked up at her. "Myself, I think." She sat beside him. The cold crept through the wool of her skirt, but she didn't mind. "I never went farther than Miles City," she said. "I used to dream of Chicago, maybe Kansas City. Somewhere with streetcars and noise and people who didn't know my name." "Why didn't you?" "I married at 17. And then there were mouths to feed, a roof to patch floods, droughts. Dreams didn't hold up well against that." Silas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You ever wish you'd waited?" She shook her head. "I wish I'd asked for more. Not different, just more of myself left to keep." He nodded slowly. "You still have plenty left." She looked at him, the wind lifting her hair against her cheek. "And what about you?" "What do you want now?" He answered without pause. "A life built on something solid, not just motion, not just getting by." Evelyn pulled her knees closer to her chest, watching the line of trees sway. "I keep thinking about the morning you came down that ridge. I do too. If you hadn't, I did." She turned to him fully. "You ever think you were meant to be there?" "I think I chose to stop," he said. "That's what matters more." The wind stilled for a moment, as if the land itself was listening back at the house. She lit the lanterns while Silas unlatched the barn doors for the night. The hens rustled in their roosts, and the children's laughter filtered in from the porch as Nora told a tale about a fox that stole a pie from a preacher's windowsill. Inside, Evelyn laid 3 plates on the table, then turned back for a 4th. She hesitated, then set it down without comment. When Silas stepped in, she was pouring cider into tin cups. He took one, fingers brushing hers. "You staying in the house tonight?" she asked, not looking up. He set the cup down. "If the offer still stands." "It does." She reached for the kettle, but he caught her hand gently. "Evelyn," she looked up. "I've been thinking about what it means staying, not just for the season." She waited. "I want to build something that doesn't end when the weather turns, something that lasts." Her voice was soft. "Are you asking what I think you are?" "I'm not asking anything yet," he said, "but I'm saying I want to be the man who earns the right to." She blinked once, then nodded. "Then stay, every day you want to. Until you can't imagine leaving." He leaned forward and kissed her gentle, certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything except the quiet truth of it. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling dry leaves along the path. But the hearth behind them burned steady, and the walls held firm, and the room, for the first time in years, felt full in the way a home ought to. By late November, the earth had hardened underfoot, and the first snow dusted the fields with a hush that made sound carry further. Evelyn stood in the root cellar, sorting through the last of the storage potatoes, hands cold through her gloves. She set aside the soft ones and listened to the rhythmic thud of Silas chopping wood outside the kitchen window. The children were inside with their new slates, Nora bent over hers with her tongue caught between her teeth, Nathan already restless and drawing shapes in the soot on the hearthstone. They had finished almost everything before the freeze. The barn stood complete, the fence repaired, the last of the firewood stacked tall under the lean-to. The house felt full of warmth, of noise, of quiet comfort. Still, Evelyn felt the change coming, not in the weather but in the way Silas looked at her lately. Like he was weighing something he hadn't yet spoken aloud. That evening, she stirred a pot of cornmeal mush on the stove while Silas tightened the hinges on the front door. The latch had started to catch, and he'd taken it apart with the same quiet focus he brought to every task. She watched him from the corner of her eye. "You always this particular about doors?" she asked, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Only the ones I plan to keep walking through." She set the cloth down slowly. "You're planning to stay through winter then?" He glanced over. "I'm planning to stay after it too." The kettle began to whistle, sharp and sudden, but neither of them moved. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice quiet. "Is that a promise or a hope?" "It's both," Silas said, "but I'd like it to be more than that." She looked up at him, waiting. "I want to marry you, Evelyn." He said it without hesitation, like he'd already made peace with the answer, whatever it might be. She looked at his hands, broad and rough from work, then at his eyes clear and steady in the lamplight. "It won't be easy," she said. "I know. You'd be father to children who already lost one. I already am in every way that counts." She didn't need time to think. She already had. Every night he'd gone out before her to check the shutters. Every morning she'd found her coffee waiting beside the stove. Every moment he'd knelt beside Nathan to help him with his numbers or sat with Nora while she sounded out her letters. "Yes," she said. Silas's breath caught faintly, and he reached for her hand, holding it like something that had waited a long time to be held right. They kept it simple. Just the four of them, and the preacher from 2 ridges over, who arrived on a borrowed mule with a Bible bound in cracked leather and a voice like gravel. Nora wore a sprig of pine in her hair, and Nathan insisted on carrying the ring wrapped in a strip of cloth. Evelyn wore her mother's shawl, the one she hadn't touched since before the fire. Silas wore his cavalry coat, cleaned and re-stitched at the seams. They stood beneath the cottonwood, its bare branches etched against the sky, and said their vows with the snow beginning to fall in light, quiet flakes. Afterward, they returned to the house, where Evelyn served sourdough biscuits and stewed apples, and Nathan asked if being married meant Silas would still help with chores or if he got to be the boss now. "I think your ma and I will share that job," Silas said, lifting Nora into his lap. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Evelyn stood by the fire brushing out her hair while Silas set the last log into the hearth. "You ever think we'd end up here?" she asked. He rose and crossed to her, placing his hands lightly at her waist. "No, but I hoped for something close." "And this is better." She turned to face him. "I feel safe with you," she said, "not just because of what you can do, but because of who you are." He cupped her cheek, thumb stroking lightly along her temple. "You gave me back a place to belong." "I'll never forget that." They lay together that night in the big bed, the walls full of warmth and the quiet sounds of sleeping children down the hall. Outside, the wind passed over the roof and moved on. Years passed, soft and steady. The children grew. Nora became a teacher, taking her first post in a schoolhouse not 10 miles off, where she read poetry aloud to shy ranch children and wrote long letters home. Nathan built a forge, hammering iron into shape beside Silas, who taught him how to temper steel and mend a wheel rim without cracking the grain. The land held. The barn stayed firm, the fields richer each spring. Evelyn kept her garden, even when her knees began to ache, and Silas built her a bench near the lilacs so she could rest between rows. They added a rocking chair to the porch. On warm evenings, they sat side by side, her fingers in his, the silence as full as any conversation. On their 20th anniversary, Silas carved a new sign for the gate. It read, "The Stokes, Vaughn Place." Below it, Evelyn planted wildflowers, and when the wind came across the ridge, it no longer carried the weight of things lost. It carried only what they'd made, together.